I just finished making this DIY solar powered water heater that's spitting out water at 120 degrees on an 83-degree day. Let me show you how I built it. Now this all started when a friend from church posted on our Facebook group asking if anyone was interested in building this for him. Naturally, I reached out, got some information, and then I did a ton of research by watching RC Insider's video that has a supplies list, and he answered a ton of my questions. So mad shout out to RC Insiders. Once I felt like I had enough research done, it was time to hit up the lumber store. At the lumber store, I picked up a 4x8 sheet of 1/2-inch exterior plywood that they cut to 4x6. I also got 4 kiln-dried 2x4x8s and then 4 treated 2x4x8s. The kiln-dried 2x4x8s are to make the frame, and then the treated pieces are to make the legs. So here I'm just making all the marks on the 2x4s to cut the frame to size, as well as cutting the legs to size. And here I measured 64 inches for the treated legs, but later I cut them down to 40 inches. After I got everything to the right length, I went over to the table saw to resaw all the 2x4s to 3/4 inches. That way the frame wouldn't be as heavy and it would look a little less bulky. I did this with 2 pieces that were 6 feet long that ran the whole length, and then I did it with the other 2 that were 46.5 inches that were the width. The hope in doing all these cuts is that they'll make 2 matching sets that will be a frame for the top and the bottom. The top will house the tubing, and then the bottom will house the legs. After resawing all the lumber, I ran all the pieces back through the table saw to straighten one side so that glue-ups would not be a nightmare. And here's how they all came out. Not bad. Next, it was time to glue and screw everything together. So I used Tite Bond III since this was going to be an outdoor piece and I wanted it to be waterproof. Use a speed square to make sure everything lined up, countersunk holes underneath through the plywood into the frame pieces, and then screwed everything in. I repeated this around the table, but also butt joined the top of the frame together as well. Once the frame was established, I ran a bead of caulk where all the joining faces were on the top. Once I finished the top of the frame, it was time to move to the bottom of the frame, and since there were already countersunk holes that were adjoining the top, I had to use pocket holes so I could drill those frame pieces in from the bottom. After drilling all my pocket holes out, I flipped the frame over to attach the frame pieces to the bottom, but before I did that, I took my impact driver to make sure that all the screw heads sunk below the surface so that the frame pieces could sit flush on the surface. From there, I proceeded to glue and drill in the frame pieces for the bottom. Just like the top, I used caulk on the adjoining faces as well. Off camera, I plugged all the pocket holes with Craig dowels, and I was going to use a flush trim saw to make sure that everything was flush. But that just took forever, and I was sweating my brains out just trying to do one. So then I busted out my random orbit sander, and that went much faster. Next, it was time to paint the frame with exterior latex paint from Rust-Oleum. Here I'm using the flat black, and I'm painting the bottom where it could touch any kind of surface, but I'm leaving the bottom face unpainted. With my wife's help, we flipped the frame over, and then I started to paint the face as well as all the frame pieces. And the reason we painted black is so that the solar water heater can absorb as much heat as possible from the sun. I ended up doing 2 coats of paint. Next was the tubing, and this is a 500-foot roll of irrigation tubing. I've never worked with this stuff in my life, as you're about to see, because I'm just making a huge tangled mess by throwing it on the ground and not thinking that this could kink or just become a nightmare. I spent the next 2 hours in a frustrated frenzy trying to get this stuff to coil while it kept kinking, while I was trying to untangle it, and I was trying to use these tube hold downs that you have to nail in, and they kept breaking the plastic. It just was not working. After letting myself cool down for a day, I did some more research and found another video of a DIY solar panel where someone used zip ties. So after marking and drawing a line for the center of all the frames, I made a template where I could drill holes quickly that would be the input and output for the zip ties to hold the tubes down. After putting in 6 zip ties on all the centers, it was time to try to start to coil this tubing again. This time it was working a lot better. I definitely liked using the zip ties more than the tube hold downs that you had to nail in. And I don't know what I was thinking here. I was trying to use one entry point to thread and pull all the tubing through, but that quickly created a lot of tension that made the tubing tangle a ton. And so after another 2 hours of frustration, I stopped and then called for help. My friend Ryan came over to help me on this, and we spent about 4 hours, 2 of them trying to untangle the mess that I made, and then the other 2 trying to get in a good rhythm. What ended up working was obviously not using the entry point, but Ryan basically followed me around as I coiled laps with the tubing. While I was doing that, Ryan took the entire stack of tubing and he would basically twist it and manipulate it to get the tension out so that we could continue to move on with no kinks and tangles. Ryan, you are a saint. Thank you for your help. Once we got our rhythm going, we put in a bunch of zip ties and kept going. Eventually, we ran out of zip ties and then I was on my own. And for the next couple of days, I kept making more laps with the tubing. Eventually, I wasn't able to continue doing the track shape with the tubing because the tubing hit the minimum bend radius. And so here you can see me switching to more like an oval shape. I think all in all, I used about 175 zip ties and couldn't feel my fingers in the end. Here I am taking the end of the tube through the outfeed hole and I was finally done coiling. Here's what cutting a bunch of zip ties with scissors looks like. And here's what it looks like when they're all on the ground, making a huge mess in my garage. Next, it was time to work on the legs, so I found the center of the treated lumber, used a 1/2 inch spacer to make a spot where I was going to use a 3/8 inch Forstner bit to make a hole that would go through the lumber. After using my drill press, I did go through the holes with a 3/8 inch drill bit just to make it a little bit looser because I needed these to fit a 3/8 inch lag bolt that would be tightened to keep the legs fastened to the frame. Now, after installing this at my friend's house, I really wish that I went with 4x4 treated lumber because I underestimated how heavy the frame was going to be with all the tubing. It would have been a lot better with 4x4s as stronger supports. But all in all, the legs worked fine because this was also going to be sitting on top of another fixture at his house. I also added these 2 2x4s to keep the legs from wobbling left and right. Now the last piece that I needed was a center piece to keep the acrylic from caving in on the top. So I just painted that really quickly along with the other 2x4s that I added, flipped it over, and got ready to start working on the acrylic sheet. The reason for the acrylic sheet is that it would provide protection from critters that might want to get in the frame, and it also helps to trap the heat. This sheet is 1/16 of an inch in thickness, and I had to use a plastic drill bit to make sure I didn't crack the acrylic all the way around, and then I went through right here with a regular drill bit to make sure I didn't splinter the wood as I was drilling in the screws. After removing the acrylic sheet, it was time to vacuum out all the sawdust and plastic that was inside of the frame so I could affix the acrylic sheet to the top. Here I had my wife's help to help me remove the protective film from the acrylic as well as maneuver it since it was so flimsy. Once we put it on the top, I went around the perimeter with 1¼ inch deck screws before removing the protective film on the top. Now I usually make furniture where I apply finish to the final product, but I gotta admit, removing the protective film and seeing this glossy top was just as satisfying as applying finish. I mean, just look at that. This came out way better than I thought that it would. Final step before delivery was to attach these hose connectors to the infeed and outfeed of the solar panel heater, and it was off for delivery. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see it during the day because I could only do nighttime delivery, but here's some footage that he sent me this morning. On the right side, you can see where the infeed goes, and on the other side of the infeed tube is a hose that is connected to the pump that's inside of the jacuzzi. On the left side, you can see where the outfeed goes, and it's connected through a hose that goes back into the jacuzzi. Here are some texts that my friend sent me this morning. He said that it was an 83-degree day in Stevenson Ranch. After letting it run for the morning and afternoon, the jacuzzi got up to 82 degrees, and it was spitting out water that was 120 degrees, way more than I thought it would be. This was my first project doing something outside of the realm of just woodworking. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to check out my Instagram at late.night.woodworker, and I'll see you later.